In verse 21, he saw the little horn making war on the saints until, up to a certain point, until three things happened. Until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Here we have a plain fact that the Ancient of Days, the person sitting on the throne in verse 9, is going to come to the earth. No doubt you have all heard of the first and second comings of God the Father to the earth. That seems to be more or less a common doctrine these days in most all churches. Now, I don't mean most all, but in quite a number of them now. I remember the time when very few churches would preach on the second coming of Jesus Christ. They didn't know very much about it. And so we didn't hear much about it in many of our modern churches. But in recent years, most all of our larger denominations are beginning to accept the doctrine of the second coming of Christ to the earth. And it's becoming more or less a common doctrine throughout Christendom. But there is a doctrine in this passage, Daniel 7:22, that the Christian church has seldom, if ever, heard of before. And yet, it's in plain English just as much as verse 13 is in plain English. Verse 13 tells us that the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. Verse 22 tells us that the Ancient of Days came. Now, where did the Ancient of Days come to, and where did he come from? Naturally, if he lives in the heavens, as Jesus Christ and all the prophets told us that he does, when Christ told us to say, Our Father which art in heaven, he didn't say, Our Father which art everywhere, all at the same time. He said, Our Father which art in heaven. Numbers of times he taught us that. God lives on a planet called heaven. He can sit on a real seat just like you can. He has a real personal body just like you have. He has bodily parts just like you have. His legs bend the same place where your legs bend. His hips bend the same place where your hips bend. He can sit on a seat just as much as you can. And he can go from place to place and does do so, just like any other person. Now here we have in verse 22, the Ancient of Days came. Where did he come from if he lives in heaven? Naturally, he would be coming from heaven. This teaches us that at the second coming of Jesus Christ, God the Father is going to accompany Christ to the earth. For you'll notice here this little horn is making war on the earth, on the saints, till he was stopped. And who put a stop to him making war on the saints? And what caused him to stop? Why, the Ancient of Days came down here. That's the reason. The Ancient of Days came where he was making war on the saints and put a stop to it. In Zechariah 14, we have a statement beginning with verse 1, that the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go forth into captivity, but the residue, or the rest of the people, shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof. And we read that half of the mountain shall flee toward the north, half of it toward the south, and there shall be a very great valley. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains. Yea, ye shall flee, ye fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. The Lord my God cometh, and all the saints with thee. That refers to the second coming of Christ, just like Daniel 7, 13, and 14, and 22 does, or do. So we have here the fact that the Ancient of Days is going to come to the earth. And in Zechariah 14:5, it's called, the Lord my God cometh, and all the saints with thee. In Titus 2:13, Paul told the Christians about the blessed hope. He said, looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of two persons. And they are called here the great God and our Savior, Jesus Christ. So we can definitely say there is coming a time when the Father is going to come to this earth visibly, just like the Son came to this earth one time before, and just like we believe that He is coming again. The Bible not only teaches a first coming of God the Father to the earth, but it also teaches a second coming of God the Father to the earth. In the 21st chapter of Revelation, it's just as clear as anything that God the Father is going to come to this earth and live here forever. For John said he saw a new Jerusalem descending from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And in verse 3 we read, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and He, God, shall dwell with them, and they shall be His people, and God Himself shall be with them and be their God." God Himself, not another. God Himself shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, tears, or sorrow. So you see, there is a first and second comings of God, of Christ mentioned in the Bible. There is also a doctrine of the first and second comings of God the Father mentioned in the Bible. When Christ came 1900 years ago, He came in visible form to live on this planet and fulfill a mission. We call that the first coming of Christ. The next coming of Christ will be the second time that He will actually come from heaven with the armies of heaven sufficiently large enough to seize the governments of this world in one day's battle and establish a reign of righteousness on the earth forever. In other words, the second time Christ is coming, it's going to be in literal, visible form, just like He came the first time. In Acts 1:11, we're told, "This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen Him go into heaven." When John saw the revelation on Patmos, the theme of that whole book concerned the second coming of Jesus Christ mainly. The main theme of the book. In verse 7, it states that theme, "Every eye shall see Him. They also which pierced Him, and all the kindreds of the earth shall wail because of Him." His coming is pictured here and there throughout the book of Revelation. And it's vividly described in Revelation 19, verse 11, where John said, "I saw heaven open, and behold a white horse, and He that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness He doth judge and make war." The armies of heaven followed Him on white horses, clothed in linen white and clean. He said, "I saw the beast, the kings of the earth and their armies, gathered together against Him that sat on the horse and against His armies. The beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before Him. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. The remnant were slain by the sword of him that sat on the horse, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh." So I think in all your getting of doctrine, you ought to add this to your many doctrines. The doctrine of the first and second comings of God the Father to the earth. God didn't accompany Christ to the earth the first time He came. He sent Him. The second time Christ comes, God will personally accompany the Son of Man to the earth, and will then give Him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve Him. And then 1,000 years later, God is going to move His capital city from the planet heaven to the planet earth to be among men forever. And we can consider that the second visible coming of God to the earth.